Welcome back to Velshi and Ruhle. Saudi diplomats are retreating back to the kingdom's borders as the fallout of a Washington Post columnist's disappearance and suspected murder grows. Secretary
of State Mike Pompeo was greeted when he arrived in Riyadh yesterday by Prince Khalid bin Salman. He's the younger brother of Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. He's also the Saudi ambassador to the United States. But this man, who we're talking about, last week returned to Saudi Arabia. U.S. officials tell the New York Times it is unlikely he will return to the United States.
And as Turkish investigators, with forensic specialists among them, arrived at the Saudi consul's Istanbul residence, the Saudi government informed them the consul had returned home as they deny any involvement in the disappearance. This is
unusual. Turkish investigators are going through the Saudi consul's residence. We are learning more about the suspects in this alleged murder. The Wall Street Journal cites people familiar with the matter, reporting that 15 Saudis flew to Istanbul on 2 jets belonging to a company called Sky Prime Aviation Services. This is a company that was seized by the Saudi government in last year's anti-corruption efforts, or at least that's what the Saudis call it. NBC News has obtained scans of 7 of the 15 passports from Turkish officials, but NBC News has not independently verified the identities of the men named in the documents. Here's what the New York Times has been able to put together. One man, Maher Mutreb, is listed on a British diplomatic roster as being assigned to the Saudi embassy in London back in 2007, according to the Times. Since then, the Times reports that he's been seen traveling with the Crown Prince all over the world, potentially as a bodyguard. A French professional who's worked with the Saudi royal family identified the next man, Abdulaziz Al-Hazawi, to the Times as a member of the Crown Prince's security team who typically travels with the prince. Another man, Thayer Al-Harbi, has been the same name reported in a Saudi news outlet as a lieutenant in the Saudi Royal Guard. The Times reports he was promoted to his current rank for defending the royal palace in Jeddah last year during an attack. Another suspect traveled with a passport that named him as Mohammed Al-Zahrani. He has the same name as another member of the Royal Guard. The name also appears in a popular app in Saudi Arabia, identifying him as well as a member of the Saudi Royal Guard. The Times also cites a 2017 video showing a man wearing a name tag bearing Al-Zahrani's name with the Crown Prince, and adding to the suspicions of Khashoggi's murder. And then there is Dr. Salah Al-Tubeji, identified by the Times as an autopsy expert. He was also with the group. The Times found that Dr. Al-Tubeji listed himself as the head of the Saudi Scientific Council on Forensics.
Say that one more time, Ali.
The name?
Just say it one more time.
Oh.
An autopsy specialist. No.
Yeah, okay.
An autopsy expert.
Yeah. Why do you ever need to travel with an autopsy expert?
You don't travel with autopsy experts.
This is definitely one of the weirder parts of this story, right? As well as the allegations that there was a bone saw taken into the Saudi consulate in Istanbul. I go to a lot of consulates to get visas. You can hardly take a sharp pen into most consulates. The idea that you can go into a consulate with a bone saw. Yeah,
and an autopsy expert.
And this guy identifies as an autopsy, a forensic specialist, on his Twitter account. He reportedly held positions in Saudi Arabia's top medical school and in the Interior Ministry. And that's not it. The Wall Street Journal adds Walid al-Sharito to the list. Saudi press reports identify him as a Saudi Air Force major. He's characterized by Turkish authorities as, listen to this, a forensics expert. According to the Journal, all of this is still under investigation as the Saudi government denies any knowledge or involvement in Jamal Khashoggi's disappearance. But boy, that's quite a crowd that was traveling, 15 people on 2 jets seized by the Saudi government going into Istanbul, making their way into the Saudi consulate in Istanbul.
A whole other level. Joining us now from Istanbul is NBC News Chief Global Correspondent Bill Neely. All right, Bill, what are you hearing thus far from Turkish officials?
Well, Stephanie, just on the point, first of all, that you brought up about that forensic specialist, you know, his presence there would suggest that this was a deadly operation right from the beginning, that this wasn't, in fact, an interrogation that went wrong. And indeed, if what we're hearing about the audio recording is correct, then Khashoggi was killed within minutes of his arrival at that consulate. There's not much time for an interrogation that went wrong. So when eventually there's an explanation from the Saudis about this, I think we should bear that in mind. If this was an interrogation to begin with, why on earth was there a forensic specialist there? in the first place. Now, to your question, for about 3 hours now, a Turkish team of forensic specialists, about a dozen of them, have been at the residence of the most senior diplomat for Saudi Arabia here in Istanbul, at the Consul General's house. There was a delay in letting the team in there. We're not sure what the delay was, but there were Saudi officials inside the Consul General's house, maybe securing Saudi secrets in there, maybe covering up, because that's what the Turkish president alleged that they did in the next door consulate. They even repainted the walls there. Anyway, the Turkish team are in there at the minute. We've seen them using ultraviolet light. Without getting into too much detail, one of the things that is used for is detecting blood splatters on the walls. They're looking for DNA samples. They're looking for anything that would connect the body of Jamal Khashoggi, which we believe was in the consulate and may have been brought to the Consul General's house. And one other small detail is that the Consul General has left. He's gone back to Riyadh. And yesterday, his wife, his 3 children and the 2 maids that were in that house were also sent back to Riyadh. So, in fact, there are no witnesses left in that house who could tell Turkish police about what happened. And indeed, the Saudis are preventing the Turks from interviewing any Saudi official or diplomat.
That's remarkable. All right, Bill, thanks for your coverage. Bill Neely for us in Istanbul. I mean,
It's tough to have that ultraviolet light work, since they already sent a full cleaning crew and they repainted the walls.
Right. I want to bring in former ambassador, U.S. ambassador to Saudi Arabia, Robert Jordan. Ambassador, good to see you. Look, this is tricky. The president keeps on framing things when asked about whether he'll take action against Saudi Arabia if it is determined that it did something to contribute to the disappearance, possibly the murder of Jamal Khashoggi. And he keeps talking about this $110 billion arms deal. Now, first of all, we only know that the Saudis have committed to about $14.5 billion, but let's accept the fact that the Saudis are among the biggest buyers of American military stuff. And the United States imports a lot of oil from Saudi Arabia. This is a complicated relationship that we have always had with Saudi Arabia. How do we start to extricate ourselves from it to the degree that we can at least be critical of human rights or press freedoms abuses?
Well, I think we should already be able to be critical of those abuses. When I arrived in Riyadh as ambassador a month after 9/11, we had similar problems. We needed the Saudis to help us fight al-Qaeda, find out who the bad guys were, and at the same time, we were very critical of many of their human rights abuses, which we pointed out to them. We were also critical of their slowness in helping us going after the terrorists. So you can do both. I do think we have got to be careful about exercising what's called dollar diplomacy, which means the dollar dictates what our policy is. That's really never been what America stands for, and it shouldn't be what we stand for here.
Well, even if it is dollar diplomacy, the $110 billion deal that the president is touting isn't even a correct dollar, because that's not what any side has agreed to. But is there an argument to be made that what the president is trying to engage in here is good diplomacy with an ally before we actually, or he actually, has hard evidence to the contrary?
Well, my guess is that our intelligence people are in touch with the Turkish officials and are receiving very similar information from to what has been leaked by the government-owned press. If not, we should be demanding it. We should also be relying on our own intelligence collection capacity, going back and reviewing what we have collected in the past and seeing how this matches up with what we think we know from the Turks. What we can count on, I think, is that the Saudis are not going to be effective in investigating themselves. So we've got to demand more from the Turks, and we've got to get the full picture of it from them, along with our own collection capabilities.
Ambassador Robert Jordan, good to speak to you. Ambassador Jordan was a former U.S. ambassador to Saudi Arabia and is the author of Desert Diplomat. Hey, MSNBC fans, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down there and click on any of the videos here to watch the latest interviews and highlights. You can get more MSNBC for free every day with our newsletters. Just visit msnbc.com/newsletters to sign up now.